Um, so what I'd like to talk about today is, obviously right-sizing your business and I guess overall sort of doing it in the best possible way. And we'll talk a little bit about the research in a second. But yeah, for those who don't know me, so basically my background is a organisational psychologist. Currently um, working with Ryan over the last 8 years. Also do a few directorships. Previously, sort of HR manager for Airways, which was a highly unionised environment, which certainly taught me a lot about about restructuring and process and procedures along the way there. So what I'd like to talk about this morning is, I guess, overall, I guess restructuring, hopefully, we'll sort of look at some of the downsides of restructuring. And so I guess sort of putting it as the last resort option, really. And what are some of the other options for actually starting to right-size the business without restructuring? But then obviously some people, won't be able to use those options. So what we're going to do is go through some of the key principles, both legal and psychological, and what's the process if we do need to restructure, and also going to look at the implementation, because quite often restructuring is time intensive. It takes a lot of effort, and of course our day job is still going on, and I think a lot of the reason that restructures often don't work is that we don't pay enough attention to that implementation at the end. And lastly, we'll look at some risks along the way. In terms of questions, so if you do have a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question. I'm more than happy to take questions along the way or at the end. If you'd like to use the chat function, you can enter questions in there, and Julie will monitor that and can either interrupt me and ask questions or clarification along the way, or we can save those questions up for the end, whichever you'd prefer. Okay, so I guess restructuring is the last resort, and why do I say that? I mean, there's been a lot of research really on how effective is restructuring, and basically what the research finds is that restructuring tends to not even achieve the financial objectives of the restructuring in 50% of the cases. So I think about 43% of the restructurings that are done actually achieve the financial objective that was set. So it's a lot harder to even achieve basic things like a financial objective, which you'd think would be the easy one. And if you look at the research on restructurings trying to achieve a culture change or be part of a change to improve the effectiveness of the business, you get down to about 30% success rates. So restructuring is quite a blunt tool to achieve either objective. And why is that? Well, I think we tend to underestimate the people who leave, their knowledge of the business and of customers. We tend to underestimate the brand impact if we are restructuring. What message does that send to our competitors? What message does that send to our clients about our ability to be there in the long term and serve them? But the big one is, I think, if you look at the research, is around this ability to bounce back. And what you'll see in the research is the organisations that, instead of restructuring, use some other tools, which we'll talk about in a second, they have the capacity to bounce back quickly after when the market improves. Whereas those that choose restructuring as an option, effectively their ability to bounce back is vastly reduced. And also there's a negative consequence even on the people who stay in the organisation. yeah, cost of rehiring. So if we're going to lose people and then rehire later on when the market improves, again, the research would say the cost of hiring in terms of downtime, training, and low productivity when a person first starts is between 40% and 60% of their salary. So that's an estimate of costs of hiring there. But the major impact is this impact on the staff that are retained. And that's twofold. One is what you call survivor guilt. So often people who, we go through a restructuring and we think that the people who are retained are going to be very pleased to have a job and therefore, they'll perform. However, that's not the case. What the research shows is that you have this survivor guilt. People feel guilty about the fact that they were retained and other people were let go. And you also have this breaking of this psychological contract people will have with the organisation. And that's this, we generally believe that, our job's going to go on. If we perform well, then things are going to go well. And we don't even think about anything else. But of course, during a restructure, when people are being let go, all of a sudden we break that psychological contract. And now people realise that actually, they could be let go themselves. So people start looking around and it has this negative impact on performance. And also people, even though their job may not be impacted by the restructure, actually you get turnover in those people later on, because now, they've broken this contract with the organisation and now start looking around for other roles. So yeah, there is a negative impact of restructuring. So so obviously, if we can avoid it, other options are better. And what are the other options? And I think, there's been a few of these on the news recently. So, Paul Kelly Cars, I think, was on the news for all staff taking a temporary pay cut. So obviously, got mutual agreement there, but so now people have taken the pay cut, and when the upswing comes, the view is that the pay will go back up again. A reduction in working hours and pay. So if we can actually reduce people's hours, obviously that reduces our capacity, but also financial obligations there. Using annual leave, obviously that doesn't help with cash flow. So if cash flow is your problem, then that's not going to help you there. But reducing, if you can get people to use annual leave, that is going to reduce your liabilities on your balance sheet, which may improve your ability to get a loan as well there. So, and obviously reduces, the availability of workers and things like that. Leave without pay. So I've worked with a couple of organisations in Christchurch here, and people took between 1 and 2 days per week leave without pay, by agreement, and over a 2-month period. One was a 3-month period. So so they reduced obviously the costs to the organisation significantly through doing that. Redeployment within the business, another one I'm familiar with. They couldn't get international workers to pick grapes, so they had corporate staff, picking grapes. So if we can have that option, we can start redeploying people within the business. Whereas without that option, they would have probably had to look at losing some roles. And secondments to other businesses. And I think a good example of this was Zespri in Tauranga. There's a number of cafes and restaurants who cooperated with Zespri and seconded their staff to Zespri to pick fruit to relieve their financial burden as well there. Study leave is another option. I know a number of organisations, people have actually taken a year's study leave to go and do an MBA or something like that, which has provided the individual with a great opportunity. And the study's been paid for, not the salary. So again, it's a large reduction in costs for the employer, but also a benefit to the employee. So the more we can think about these other options, the better off we are. All those all these changes require, consultation and agreement, but that people generally respond better to this if we can actually say, look, we value you, we want to keep you. We're in a bit of a bind at the moment. Here's some of the options. And obviously, if people don't want to agree to it, then restructure is in the back pocket. So we can still say, well, look, if we can't get agreement to this is what we're going to have to do. So yeah, so it's not saying restructuring is not there, but it's certainly looking for more positive outcomes. So so I guess I'd say that's the first port of call. If you can't get that sort of options going, then the key principles for a restructure there's some legal principles here and also some psychological principles, I suppose. So the first ones are the legal ones. So so good faith, operating in good faith is still a requirement in a restructuring sort of situation there. And that's a principle that we need to be open and honest with employees. We need to give them information, and we need to consult them and to hear what they've had to say and consider that. So this is a fundamental employment law principle. The second one there is that there's a fair and reasonable process, which is procedural justice. That there is a process in place, and that it's fair and that it's applied evenly to all individuals. So they are the two key legal principles to keep in mind. And of course, even on the previous slide, where we are looking to change employment conditions, then these two principles will apply there, that we need to consult with people to get their feedback, and there needs to be agreement to any changes in conditions. In a restructuring situation, obviously we don't need agreement, but we do need to consult and to consider people's perspectives. So in the end of the day, it is the organisation's decision whether they go ahead, but there does need to be consultation with that. The psychological principles, I guess is communication. So and respect and compassion and dignity. So communication is obviously in a change situation. Whenever there's change there's heightened emotions, and people, in terms of trusting the business, trusting what's going on, they need more information to maintain that trust. So the key focus is lots of communication during these sorts of processes. And the second key principle there is this respect, compassion, and dignity. And I think this is, we don't like these situations. We tend to get uncomfortable ourselves, and because of that, it can become very formal. But what we need to maintain is this bit of compassion and dignity with that. And this is a key, obviously, for the well-being of those who leave your organisation, but also there are those who stay. So, so the research says that, the people who stay, if they see you being compassionate to those who are leaving, they're much more likely to be loyal to your organisation and to stay with your organisation. So, and that's going to impact your productivity in the short term, but also your retention of those key staff in the medium to long term. So those are the key principles to think about as we go through. In terms of the process itself, some key stages here are obviously planning before you start, communication again, as we indicated earlier, the consultation, what does that look like, time to consider people's responses, making a decision, and then implementing that decision. So we'll go through each of those key stages step by step. Yeah, so the first one is your plan, and the key element here is in the planning, I suppose. The devil's in the detail, as it were. I guess the key ones there are the numbers required. If you're meeting a financial objective or you've had a downturn in work, what does that represent people-wise? On the front line, they're delivering services, but also infrastructure-wise, in terms of management or support services or things like that. The key thing to take into account here is what are the other things that you should be considering? What retirements are coming up? What turnover do we have normally? Is there any other factors we should be taking into account? People who are currently on maternity leave or people who may be going on maternity leave that we know about. So yeah, so getting a good idea of all your workforce planning. Is this a temporary downturn, or is it, how long do we think the downturn's going to last for? Because there's nothing worse than, making people redundant with all the negative impact of that. And then, a month later or 2 months later, you have to re-employ people or go to the market again because, in fact, you've cut too deep. So I guess the key principle here is cutting as less as you can to minimise the negative impact on your business, and tweaking, as you go along. So basically you're looking at the numbers and then the structure. So depending on how big your business is or how many numbers you're cutting out, are we actually going to change the structure and reporting lines as well? And then you might need to think about, well, how do I structure my business? How am I going to best achieve my strategy? And structure, there's no right structure, but structures generally help people communicate and make sure that people communicate with who they should be communicating with. So if you're in the same team or report to the same manager, then that guarantees communication generally. If you're working for different managers, then all of a sudden you've introduced some restrictions or potential restrictions on communication. So how do we develop a structure that makes sure that people who need to communicate with each other are communicating with each other? The next one is redistribution of tasks. So if we're going to remove some roles, where does that work go to? So, and do those people have capacity or skills to pick up that work? The next stage is checking employment agreements and policies and things, and it may seem a bit trivial, but it's amazing the number of people who don't do that. Had a situation recently where a colleague was working with an organisation and had not considered some of the employment arrangements that were in place. So people who may technically be a casual, but in fact in reality are actually a permanent employee. So we need to consider those things as well. And any policies you may have in place. So do you have a policy around how you're going to manage change processes? So obviously you need to, policies, you need to exceed or meet or exceed what your policies are and what the legal obligations are. And then preparation. So, if we are going to go out and consult, we need to make sure we've got enough information to give people. So that may be forming new PDs if there's new roles in your structure, or indicating how existing PDs may be altered, and getting information on remuneration. So people are going to want that level of detail. If there's change in place and we're expecting people to stay or apply for a new role or do extra duties, we need to have thought about in advance, is there going to be extra pay for the extra duties? Or do we expect them to do that within their current role? So the next stage is communication. So we've got our plan together, we've got our documentation together, and communication is the next part there. So key one is if you have unions or some of your staff unionised, then you're going to want to communicate with them first. Generally, you're trying to keep that pretty close to the announcement to staff. So, you might be talking about, an hour or two before, or, if it's a particularly trusted relationship, it may be the night before or something like that. And also typically, if it's unionised staff, then you're going to have a union presence at that at the communication meeting as well. And then within your current staff, typically you're going to be talking to the people directly affected individually first. So we sit down with those. So it may be your announcements in the early afternoon, and then you can actually meet with each of the individually affected people in the morning and outline to them and give them the option whether they want to be there in the afternoon's announcement or not. If it's a whole team affected, then you may also meet with that team as a team rather than individually. And then your second set of meetings are going to be those impacted. So that these may be the people who currently interact with a role that will no longer be there, or that they're going to have to pick up some tasks that the roles who are no longer there are going to transfer those tasks to them. And also, you want to also communicate with your team overall, and that's really just around making sure they understand what's going on. And again, this principle of communication is if we're not telling people what's going on, then the gaps will be filled by the vacuum. So the less we tell people, the more they're going to guess what's going on, and generally people guess worse than what it really is. So so again, the key principle here is over communicate rather than under communicate. In terms of the what are we communicating, so this is really important. To everybody, I guess, why the changes are being made, and it may seem obvious. COVID-19's restricted our business, but we just need to be. We need to state the obvious sometimes, but also to quantify that a bit. So our sales have dropped by 50%, or our revenues down X%. So so again, we're giving people a clear reason or rationale for the change. Second is, what are the proposed changes and how will it work? So, here's where we get down to detail. This role is going to be, our proposal is that this role will be disestablished. Our proposal is that this role will change focus. Our proposal is, this role will pick up some additional tasks. So we need to be really clear so that people understand how it's going to work based on the changes. The second thing we need to communicate there is the process going forward. So what's going to happen going forward from here? So we've put a proposal for change to staff. Now we're going to get your feedback on that proposal, and we're going to make a decision by X date, and then we're going to come back to you after we've made our decision and communicate that with you. And if you're an affected person, then it'll be saying, your role is potentially affected by this proposal. If the proposal goes ahead, then your role will be disestablished at that point. And obviously, in these sort of situations, having support available is key. Typically, people don't use it, but it is one of those things that it's really good to have that there if that's possible. So that might be your EAP provider. If you have one of those, they tend to provide these sort of services, or sourcing something. And even if a person sits in a room, and you just let people know, actually, if you need to talk to somebody about there, then that's really important. For the people who are affected, quite often you're offering support to them or their partner. So if they want to talk to somebody during the consultation and decision period, then they're available to talk to them. Again, typically people don't use it, but it is a good practice to have that available. And yeah, in terms of that communication, that may also involve, new position descriptions, some financial information if that's appropriate, and a letter for confirming what you've just discussed. So that letter obviously really important for the people who are directly affected. So their role may be just established, but also the other people. It's quite amazing the number of times you do this, and people who are not affected haven't quite got that message. There's a lot of emotion in these sort of meetings, so that actually they need something in writing to help them read afterwards and realise in fact their position is not affected by these changes. So yeah, so we want to minimise the anxiety as much as possible, and again, that's over communication. We may think a staff meeting is fine, but in fact, you'll find there's people there who haven't quite got the message. Yep. So we've communicated, and the next stage is consultation. We'll communicate the potential change. We'll say there's a proposal for change on the table. And for the next week or two, then we'll consult with those people. Now, the length of consultation period is going to be is traditionally dependent on how long those people have been there. So, if the people affected have been there 20 or 30 years, then a 2-week or a 3-week consultation may well be appropriate. If the people we're consulting with are going to leave, been there a year, then a week may be fine. Under COVID, I think that got compacted again, but I think that was really during the lockdown period. I think the legal precedent going forward, I think, will be moving back to that sort of 1 or 2 weeks consultation. So during the week, if you're going to have a week's consultation, you might announce this, Friday morning. The next week will be consultation, so you might meet with the people on Wednesday who are directly affected, and with the other people indirectly affected, and then again you might meet with them on Friday. If the end of consultation was the end of Friday, then you might actually meet with them again on the Friday. In that consultation, what we're looking for is what's their feedback on the proposed changes. Do they think it's going to work? Why won't it work? Or why will it work? And also, if you've got multiple people who could potentially go into the roles that are left, then you also need to consult on the process for selecting people into those roles. So is it going to be via interview? Is it going to be via length of service or some other mechanism for achieving that? Again, if we've got 3 people currently in a role, and in the new structure there's only 2 roles, then obviously we give all 3 people the opportunity to put their hand up for that. If one of them doesn't want it, then obviously it makes it easy. You swap the other 2 people in there. If all 3 people do want that role, then we may go through some sort of interview process or length of service or some other criteria you define. You can't use psychometrics in that case, so personality or ability. You can use psychometrics where it is a new role. So you say, actually, there's three of these current roles. Actually, we're going to create 2 new senior roles or 2 new roles that are significantly different to the current role. In that case, we can use psychometrics because psychometrics measure potential. So what we're looking for there is saying these 3 people haven't done this job before. We're using psychometrics to measure their potential to move into that role. So we need to consult them on that process as well. The key thing during consultation is to document any feedback you get. So and what we want to do in that that process there is document the feedback, so that when we go back to people, we can actually say, well, here was your feedback, here's our response to that feedback. Yeah, key one there is keep those feedback or communication lines open. You know, I've dealt with a few organisations where senior managers have gone on holiday during a consultation period, which is definitely not optimal. Yeah, so you know, you want to be there, and you want the direct line managers of people to, you know, to be wandering around and being visible during those times, so that people can grab them, people can talk, but also people can actually, the managers can actually correct, you know, incorrect information that may be being talked about, and be a sounding board for people during that time as well. So the next stage is considering, you know, considering that feedback. So, you know, we can't, again, that good faith principle is that we actually take the time to consider what people have told us. You know, so if you've got a consultation period that ends on a Thursday night, you can't go out with a decision on Friday morning and say we've decided to do what we proposed. Away we go. You know, that would not look like there's been genuine consideration of people's feedback. So, you know, so if your consultation period ended on a Friday night, then you might come back to people on Tuesday morning. So that gave you, you know, the weekend to think about it, and Monday to consolidate it, and then you know, Tuesday to come back. So, you know, there needs to be some time where you're actually showing, you're actually thinking about what their feedback has been. If based on the feedback there are significant changes to your proposal, then you may need to go through a reconsultation period. So that would be, you know, much shorter. It might be two or 3 days. But, you know, if it's significantly different, then we may need to go back to people and say, okay, based on the feedback, here's what we're now proposing. What do you think about that? Yeah, and then when we do go with our decision, we want to compile, you know, what has been the feedback, and what is our response to that. So some of the feedback we may accept. We say, yes, you're quite right, we hadn't thought about that. Here's what we're going to do based on that feedback. Or some of the feedback, you know, some of the feedback may say, actually, you know, we had to consider that, but we're comfortable with it. We're comfortable that this proposal, or it's not a significant risk. We're comfortable that actually we don't think that's going to be a problem. So again, we just need to be clear about how we're responding to what the feedback we've received is. And then they obviously the next one is obviously making a decision and communicating your decision. So similar to the previously, so we're going to communicate again, if there's a union involved, we communicate with them first. If there's you know, people individually affected, then we would communicate to those people first. Now, typically, because we know in advance about this meeting, and they know in advance what's going on, then we can actually suggest that people can bring a support person to that meeting as well. So that may be a partner or a legal representative or something like that. So, you know, so if we have decided to restructure their role, so at this point, you know, they are not redundant. At this point, their role has been disestablished. So effectively, they don't have a role in the organisation anymore. They're still an employee of the organisation. So yeah. So now, okay. So now we've decided to disestablish your role. Now we need to say, okay, what are we going to do with you? First option is, are there any redeployment options? Are there any other roles that have been created by the restructure they could apply for? If there are none, then are there any other things they think they could do within the organisation? We can consider that, and if none, then we effectively provide them with a letter which gives them notice. So if their notice period in their employment agreement is 2 weeks, then at that point you're saying, you know, effectively, we're giving you notice that your employment comes to an end in 2 weeks. Yeah. now your choice is there. So if you have, if the person is ending their employment with you, then do they stay, or do you give them gardening leave? Again, that will be outlined in your employment agreement. So if that's not in your employment agreement, then you can't make people take gardening leave. If it is, then you can. Obviously, if they opt for that and it's not in their employment agreement, you can accept that. Yeah, but generally, there's been probably some high profile cases where people haven't played nice after they've been made redundant, but generally people do, and generally people still have the best interests of the organisation at heart. So the days of frog marching people out after they've been made redundant are generally over. Generally people will stay on for some or all of their notice period. And I think this is an underlying principle of compassion and dignity, that there's no shame in being made redundant. And I think there's been this shame associated with it before, or a thought that a person who's been previously loyal for 20 years is going to turn into a saboteur overnight because of redundancy. That typically doesn't happen. So obviously you may need to keep an eye on it if you're worried about that. But typically people do stay and work out their notice period quite effectively. In terms of the redeployment, so basically so there's a case probably about 6 or 7 years ago now, where courts effectively said the obligation is on you to train people to be redeployed if possible. So I guess the key one, if there are roles which are similar to what the person is doing currently, that have been created by a restructure, the obligation is generally on you to try and train them to move into that role. So if it's a significant thing, if it's they're an accounts payable clerk now, and the new structure creates a new accounting role, and to be an accountant you need to be a chartered, have a degree and be chartered, then that would be seen as being excessive, the training requirement. But if it's just to learn a new system or to learn some additional responsibilities, then the obligation on the employer is to train the person to meet the new requirements. Cool. So the last, I guess, the other compassion part too is around this providing good levels of support to people through the changings. And as I mentioned earlier, that can be as much as your manager being available. So don't be absent. This is an uncomfortable situation. People don't like this. But if we all go around ignoring people who've had this bad news, then it makes them feel worse, and it also impacts negatively on the people who are staying, because now they feel worse about the situation as well. So as employers, the tricky part is to go and talk to these people and be around and be there to talk to them, and be supportive as much as possible. Similarly, make sure peers know it's okay to talk and support them. So, and this is a tricky balance, but it's fascinating research actually by a Christchurch organisation recently, and they said to people, if you're feeling bad or depressed, who do you talk to? And I think 60% said that they talk to their peers first. So the peers are people who they go to support. Managers, I think, was a distant second on about 22%. Sorry, our peers was about 60%, I think, and HR was 3%. So the more we can actually facilitate people feeling able to talk to their peers, the better. But this also, helps the organisation as well, because if you don't tell peers what's going on, if it's all secret squirrel, and the person is feeling aggrieved and emotional, then they're going to be going and talking badly about the company to other employees, and the other employees are not going to have the context or understand what's going on to interpret those. So they are more likely to come out with a negative understanding or interpretation of the organisation as well. So yeah, so we want to encourage the people who are being staying to be supportive, to understand what's going on, to be able to talk to the manager as well, to help them move through this process as well. Yeah, allow time off for people affected to prepare feedback or to have interviews if they're going for other roles, or just actually they feel overwhelmed by the situation and they want the day off. And all those things, I think if they can let them know they can do that, that's great. Yeah, have support on the day. So as I mentioned earlier, that can be EAP when you first start communicating. But when you're making your final decision, that may be a partner or something like that, or could be EAP as well. And then obviously through the process and afterwards, having some sort of access to support is very useful. And the other one is, have a morning tea parting gift. Often organisations where somebody's made redundant, again, they treat it almost like a disciplinary, that that the person all of a sudden they were there and now they're not. So I think again, obviously up to the person, but there's no shame in this. We should be celebrating their time with the company and being open about it. Hey, look, this is not something we wanted to happen, but here's where we're at. And unfortunately, this person has to leave us. So let's celebrate them as they're exiting. So all those things, I think normalise it for the staff as well as the person leaving, and make the organisation much more able to bounce back quickly. And the last one there is obviously job search, CV preparation again. So if we're in financial difficulty, often we don't want to do this stuff, because it is costly. However, I think we need to think about not only the impact on the people leaving, but also the people staying. So did they see you treating the people fairly who had to leave? So again, I think the more we can provide some support, and people will know that there's been support provided to people leaving, then the better the people who are staying will actually feel about the organisation as well. So so that helps rebuild their trust in the organisation. And remember, they're going to be interpreting. The people who stay are going to be interpreting your behaviour as well. We stand up there and say, oh, unfortunately, we have to let some people go. And then you don't provide any support, or there's no morning tea. They're going to be interpreting that as, perhaps they weren't as sorry as what they're saying they were. So how do we help communicate to them what our intentions are and what do we want our long-term perspective to be? I think one company sort of said, what do we want to be known for in 2 years' time as an organisation? So so how do we want our current staff to see us in 2 years' time, or our customers to see us in 2 years' time, based on how we react to COVID-19, which is quite a cool thing, isn't it? It's actually saying, what's the long-term impact of this? What do we want to be seen as, and how do we think about our actions going forward through this difficult process, and how will that impact on how people will see us long term? And so the last one there is around implementing the changes. So, and again, as I said at the beginning, I think half the reason that restructurings often fail is that we don't do anything afterwards. We've done this big restructure, we've gone through all the pain. Now we just get back to our day job and expect things to work. I certainly worked with one organisation. We did a major restructure for them. They wanted their leaders to do more leadership. So so they disestablished a number of roles people had to apply based on their leadership potential. And then I went back to work, do some work for them, 6 or 7 years later, and all the same issues were on the table. And you said, well, what happened after the last restructure? And the answer was nothing. They'd restructured all these people, people lost their jobs, but actually nothing had been put in place to help people realise the potential or to do things differently. So I guess that's the question of, if we're restructuring some roles, how do we actually going to help people to do whatever we need them to do differently going forward? So that may be training, it may be coaching, maybe some workshops, sitting down with the architects of the restructure and saying, here's how I expect it to work. And re-engaging with those people, the people who are staying, how do we re-engage with them, to make sure that they're coming back on board with the organisation and trusting again. So again, if we look at the research on trust, it's all about time. There's no such thing as quality time in terms of trust. It's all quantity time. So how do we spend some more time with our people to help them sort of see, who you are and what you are and how you can help them move forward. Reconnect them with the why of the business. Why do you do this thing? What value do you add to your customers? What value do you add to your community? So again, help people see, why they enjoy this work, or what's it about the work that resonates with them. How do we help them see that? And the last one there is, create more opportunities for involvement. So if you suffered financially due to COVID, how can we involve people more in planning? What are things we could be doing to do better and recover faster? So the more we can actually get people involved and thinking about the business, thinking about the future, then we the better off we're going to be. There's some fascinating research that says our hope accounts for 14% of job performance. So if people are hopeful about the future, if they can see where they're heading and how they can get there and what's going to be different about the future, then their job performance is radically improved. So how do we recreate that hope for a better future? At a time when people may be sort of focusing on the pain of the immediate past. So those are the key steps. If we look at risks, so typically the risks or the things that can come out negatively from a restructure around people thinking they've been actually singled out, that it wasn't a genuine restructure, it was actually a performance issue. I was not performing, therefore they made me redundant. And the reason that's a risk is that lacks procedural justice. So if a person took a grievance on that basis, the court would be saying, actually, if it was a performance issue, you should have given the person feedback. You should have given them the opportunity to improve. So that's one of the common negative or common reasons for personal grievances after a restructure. The second one can be related to the first, in that not enough information is given about the reasons for the change. So people, if not enough reasons being given for the change, people can guess what the reason is. So now I'm likely to think it's actually just me. They just want to get rid of me, rather than it being a genuine reason. So again, we need to give sufficient reason and information and documentation to people to show them why we actually need to change. And that can, that's obviously difficult if we don't give it to them normally. So again, if we normally give people updates as to where you are financially, then this stuff's not going to come as a surprise. If you only start giving to them when you've got a financial difficulty, then again, they can interpret that negatively. The third one is that people believe you've already made a decision, that the consultation and consideration process wasn't genuine. Yeah, so the key thing here is, again, that feedback, that we've actually captured their feedback, we've repeated it back to them, we said what's happened, how we've responded to the feedback. Yeah, and taking some time to make sure that the decision on the documentation doesn't look, a short consultation period and it comes out very quickly, a whole lot of documentation showing that you've made the decision. So yeah, so we need to make sure that that doesn't look premeditated. The other thing to be aware of is if people take a grievance, not only might they get some money for that, but the courts generally like some sort of redundancy payment. So most employment agreements now would say, or typically in the past, they've actually had no redundancy payments. Whereas, if things do go to a personal grievance, then the courts will award something for redundancy. Now, to mitigate that risk, you can actually pay something for redundancy even though it's not in the employment agreement. So typically that would be 2 weeks salary at a minimum, or 2 weeks extra notice than what the person's contractually entitled to. So that means if they did take a PG, then the court's going to say, well, you actually got something redundancy-wise. We're not going to award anything extra. Whereas if you don't put that in, then of course the court can make up their own number, which might be more, which is likely to be more than the number you're paying. So just conscious of time, but just some conclusions before we get on to some questions there. So I guess the key theme is, communicate, and then more communication, to mitigate those the risks, and that people will fill in the gaps in these heightened emotion times. Provide lots of opportunities for people to ask you questions, be there so they can bounce things off you and provide feedback, and make sure you write it down when they talk to you so that they can see you've taken it on board. Include all relevant employees, so it's not just those directly affected. It may be those who have to take on extra tasks or do things differently, and even the broader employee base, so they know what's going on. Otherwise, that can create a negative environment as well. Make sure some support's available, and that can be EAP, that can be managers, or preferably both. Or encourage other peers to be supportive. So all those things are really important. And then genuinely consider feedback before making your final decision.